I grew up in a small town, Central California, and the movie theaters there didn't show, much beyond Bridge on the River Kwai and The Blob. So I didn't really experience foreign films until I found my way into film school. And at that point is when I was actually exposed to
Damon Packard.
And a friend of mine, John Milius, actually was a huge fan of
Damon Packard.
And so whenever a film was showing, he'd say, "Oh, you got to come and see this. You got to come and see this." And after the first one, the first one I saw was
Reflections of Evil.
completely hooked. I said, this is really good. It's hard to really appreciate the true genius of
Damon Packard.
until you've seen a few of the films, and then you've been able to see other films at the same time and be able to realize his visual style. My favorite of all time is
Reflections of Evil.
then maybe
Foxfur.
and then
Space Disco 1.
not at the very top of my list, but I was impressed and I liked it. And it's really his visual style to me that is so strong and unique, and again, a very, very powerful element in how he tells his stories. I think he comes from a generation of filmmakers that were still influenced by silent films, which is something that I've been very interested in.
George Lucas there, gushing about Damon Packard. Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Good Art the Podcast. This is your host, Kay Gerard. Today's episode features an interview with filmmaker Damon Packard. We discuss the making and meaning of some of his films, his feelings of Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and why he was banned from Universal Studios. Enjoy. With Space Disco 1, the sort of, you say the world ended in 1985, right?
84.
84, okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
84. And,
yeah, time froze in 1984.
And we're just sort of, we're reliving that 84?
Well, I mean, not the good 84. I mean, the actually 84 was probably a pretty good year. All things considered, it was actually a very creative, fun year. We still had the energies from the early 80s left over, but the 84 in Space Disco is supposed to be the George Orwellian nightmare 1984. So if we, which is now, which basically is, 2020, the period we're in now. But so, yeah, the 84 is the George Orwell 84. It's symbolic,
right,
in the movie for the. So time just froze in that 1984. The real 1984 was actually a fun period, strangely enough. Very creative, and you could see, but it is interesting because you could start seeing the changes that were taking place, going, the downslide, going towards this sort of more restrictive, the early 80s represented that, really starting in 83 and 84. You could see the very first changes that were leading us to the late 80s, which is, which was kind of like the corporate takeover, the more restrictive era, police presence, that sort of thing, from a looser period, from a more celebrative period, which was the 70s and the early 80s. So it's interesting that, it was probably, you could point to that year as the beginning of what would lead to this darker period, which was pretty much fully realized by the late 80s, in my mind, if I'm sort of pinning this down to specific time periods.
Right.
Everyone has a different idea about that. But.
And then the general idea of the movie is there is a roller rink inside of this spaceship. And it's somehow powering the spaceship, or controlling
Yeah.
a spaceship?
Oh, I like that. That's good. Yeah, let's go with that. It's powering the spaceship. Yeah, people are roller skating, and they have to keep roller skating. Now, I'm just coming up with this now because I liked your idea, but that wasn't. It's a roller rink on a spaceship, like a love boat in space. But I like the idea of they have to keep roller skating in order to generate the ship.
Well, it's really the only sort of context we get inside of the ship, right?
Well, it is sort of powering it in a way because it's keeping the energy and the celebrative mood going. But
yeah,
it's the love boat in space. I couldn't actually, that was the movie that I couldn't make.
Right. Yeah, that one's technically just a trailer, right?
But it was sort of done partly as like a fake behind the scenes making of piece, and then I added the 1984, the Beyond 1984 segments to it, and it all kind of. Then I just pieced it all together as this mash of several different ideas, and that became. Because I think the original concept was just the last 10 minutes of the movie. If you remember the fake featurette, the pseudo featurette at the end with the Logan's Run audio, that's all I was planning to do from the start. Shoot it behind the scenes, do it over, shoot it in one day, and gather a group of people and have fake camera props and
those fake camera props
actors and costumes
are. And that one is like.
But yeah, and then it expanded. I mean, I didn't expect it to be 45 minutes because there was no money at all. It was just sort of something. It was a fun experimental idea. I just wanted to go out and do and shoot in one day. Then it expanded, and I added on all these things, and it became a little mini feature with the 1984 scenes and more of the behind the. I think I added shot a couple more days of the fake behind the scenes featurette part of it. That part of it doesn't really work too well. I think the end, the segment at the end works well, where I'm using the Logan's Run audio as a guide for it, but the stuff at the beginning, I don't think is just a little strange. It doesn't really quite work. A little too silly.
Do you mean when he's sort of like that older gentleman's giving him like the?
Well, that's the beginning of that's a separate idea. That's like another movie there. Those are the Beyond 1984 scenes.
Right.
Those are okay, and all the scenes at Universal City Walk, which is supposed to be the Orwellian world, what is it called, that night, Ministry of Propaganda, I think, or something like that. It's substituting for, some nightmare, all shot Universal City Walk. That was like a kind of a separate idea there. That was sequel to 1984. The fake featurette part of it was the sequel to Logan's Run, the roller rink on the spaceship, Love Boat in Space. So the stuff with the man on the table, that's 1984. Beyond 1984.
What does he say? It's like they'll know every time you fantasize about an underage girl or a teenage girl.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. See, I was trying to throw in all this stuff that was going on at the time, like To Catch a Predator and
yeah, right. That's what.
The things happening around 2007, 2008, and all that stuff. I thought was very Orwellian in a way. Sex crime and all this.
Yeah, it certainly
that's
is
what all
Orwellian.
that was about.
Yeah. So let's move on to Reflections of Evil here. There's the longer version, it's 2 hours and 17 minutes. And then the other version's just under 2 hours.
I don't. Let's see. Well, the long version is not 2 hours and 17 minutes. I don't think it is it? It's a little shorter than that, I believe. Here, I can tell you right now exactly. I have it in my computer. But yes, there are different cuts. There's the long version, and then there is a 117 version, something like that, a little under 2 hours, or maybe it's 115. And then there's a 90-minute version, as well. So yeah, I was really hoping to avoid that at the very beginning. I had a feeling that would happen. I mean, as these things always sort of end up that way, and I was really hoping, not to have multiple versions that would confuse people, but okay, wait, I was just trying to look up the running time. Anyhow, but yes.
The longer one is the one that starts out with the Joey Heatherton.
Yeah, right, exactly. All that
commercial.
extra stuff there with the Joey, right, that's only in the long version. You're right, it's 2 hours and 17 minutes. Wow, I didn't realize it was that long. That's too long. But yeah, all that stuff with Joey Heatherton, and it is too long. I'm not sure if, any of the shorter versions are necessarily better, but yeah, it's stretched out a little too much. Every scene goes on a little too long in that movie.
What were you doing? What were you doing there with why that Joey Heatherton commercial?
I don't know. I can't remember. I just loved that. I thought those were great. At that time this is pre-YouTube, and all that stuff is so omnipresent now. On the internet, it's not that special anymore. But at the time, I was really taken up by vintage promos and things from the past. They were a little more difficult to track down. At that,
right.
The late '90s, early 2000s. You could find them. There were specialty video stores where you could dig out that stuff. And I'm sure it was even more difficult. You go back before that. You go back when the selections were less, and even pre-VHS. Then you'd have to find private collectors' tapes and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure why I started it with Joey. It just had a dreamy. I think it was that dreamy quality that set the mood for that I wanted to set the mood for, and it opens with the old couple who are watching TV. I remember that was a big part of the idea, that this old couple are kind of trapped in, even though they're in the present, the window to the past is all this vintage TV stuff that they're watching. And I can't remember exactly what all that meant, or what the logic behind all that was. I think it was all the flashbacks always occurred to the past, always occurred when we cut back to the old people. So they were like a bridge to the past of the movie, since part of it is set in the early 70s, part of it in the early 2000s, this era of chaos and noise and madness and people going crazy, and pre-2000, pre-9/11, by the way. Actually, the 9/11 happened right at the end of filming, so they got incorporated a little bit.
The old couple, I think, is a really good example of the way you use sound to. You emphasize, like, when the old man, like, sits down, it's like, you hear his cushion squishing, and then his, like, flip-flops squishing and squeaking. It's so funny. And you have this approach to sound that I think is amazing, because it's all over the top, but it's not always comical, but it always adds. In Space Disco 1, there's the scene where it's like the 1984 story, and they're just sitting down and eating, essentially. And that's really all the scene is. But the sound is so layered and over the top that it makes the scene really interesting. And if you had cut all that sound out, it would just be two guys eating, and it would be horribly boring, Yeah. I love your approach to sound, is what I'm trying to say. And the over-the-top sound is amazing.
Yeah, well, yeah. I don't know what to say about that. I always had an interest in sound design and creative sound design and what you can do with sound. And it's also something you can do, when you're making something when you're lacking for no budget. When you're doing something for no money, you're always trying to make up with other things that you can do. So sound is one thing you can go crazy with.
Right.
It doesn't take a lot of. I mean, if I can't have an action scene with a lot of stunts and explosions and cars crashing, and then I can have weird, exaggerated sound effects.
Yeah, or maybe you can do the thing that Troma used the same car explosion scene in like 25 movies.
Oh yeah, well that's I mean that's been a practice of low budget films forever.
Right.
I mean
right.
not just Troma, but tons of other things, reusing Corman Productions and things, reusing things they spent money on in other movies. And sometimes they would just take the repackage and re-release the same movie, just add some different scenes, change the title. I mean, Al Adamson did that for a number of his films, and Corman did it. And yeah, I mean, in those days, you could do that. I mean, people were easy to you could make money, and audiences weren't as. I mean, you could get those things released, wherever, drive-ins or
right, yeah,
somewhere in the South, or grindhouses somewhere, and they'd make money automatically. It just, as long as it was in focus and color and had some nudity and gore, it couldn't go wrong. Really, you had all the right ingredients. And
so, have you been back to Universal Studios?
Actually, I don't think I almost went back. It doesn't really interest me. I don't think I have since 2001. I think was the last time I was there when I got kicked out. I think that was the last time I stepped foot in that park. Now I didn't have any. I think I could have gone back any time. I mean, and it's not like they're going to stop me. But just never had any interest in that place, really.
Yeah.
And it's so overpriced now. But I almost did a couple of times. I mean, via a friend, or out of town friends who were going. But no, I don't think I have.
I only asked because there's rumors on the internet that it says, "Oh, he was banned for life."
Yeah. Well, I mean. I think technically, yeah, I don't know if, when I was thrown out, they said that, I think they said something like that. I don't know, at the time. I mean, I can't remember. They gave me some, I mean, they were trying to figure out what to do. I mean, I wasn't doing anything really. I mean, they were just trying to figure out some way they didn't take my camera and film. That's all I cared about.
Right.
And they just thought I was. I mean, I don't know what they thought. They just wanted someone to harass. What are you doing with that camera? You're filming children. They thought I was like some weird, creep or something walking around. I don't know what they thought, but then they were just standing around like trying to figure out, well, what can we do? I mean, what's this guy? What can we lay on this guy? Can we? And then they just kind of wrote me a thing. All right, you've been banned or something like that. Don't come back. So, and that was that. Because they have the sheriff's department is up there at Universal City Walk. So there's always lots of cops up there because they have their home base is up there. So they're bored. They just.
You funded Reflections of Evil with an inheritance, and then like reportedly bought, a couple. How many DVDs was it?
Well, you mean after in the promotion?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had thousands. I had probably, something like 20,000 discs printed afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went a little crazy with that. So I was getting them mass. I was getting like runs of 3,000 made really cheap for 50 cents a piece or something like that. That includes artwork and packaging and everything. So as long as I got 3,000, I never expected to go over 3,000 from the first run. I thought I'd be good
Right.
for years. But I ended up sending them all out and giving them to people, and then I got another 3,000 and another 3,000. It was insane. I couldn't believe how many of those things but it was really fun. Kind of, it was a guerrilla marketing campaign, and I was leaving them around, and every time I was hanging out with like when I was with my friend Sage, we'd leave copies of it around, and it was just always a fun thing to do, and I kept running out of copies of it. At one point, I was selling quite a few when Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull posted a review on his website.
What?
And I suddenly had hundreds of orders, and I used up the rest of what I had. So I actually did make some money at that time. Not as much as I spent on the movie and the replication, but that that was nice. I mean, I probably sold 400 or 500 copies just through Jethro Tull, just through Ian Anderson.
God bless Jethro Tull.
Ian Anderson. I slurred that. What were you saying?
I said God bless Jethro Tull.
Yeah.
That's
Strangely enough, I'm not. I'm not. I like Ian Anderson. I'm not his number one fan. I mean, he was just on the list. He was on that list where it was going to everybody. It would have been. I wish somebody. I wish one of the members of Rush or had that reaction, or U2 or the Cranberries or someone I was a really big fan of and would have loved to work with. But it was just kind of a random response from a few musicians. And there was Ian Anderson, there was Sammy Hagar, who I'm also not the biggest fan in the world of. I mean, I don't dislike him. I'm just not. Just never got into his music.
Sure.
I love Van Halen, but not the Sammy Hagar period. But there was him. There was who else? I think that's pretty much. Henry Rollins.
The diner scene with you and your character and his mother. And she's grandmother, right? Berating him for being overweight, and
right.
She says something along. She says binded and dislodged.
Oh yeah. And
that sticks with me because I don't understand what it means.
It's Actually, that relates to a scene, a little bit that I cut from that scene. There was this stuff that they were selling called Kaito-san on Coast to Coast at that time. It was a radio show, Art Bell.
Oh, yeah, Coast to Coast.
And it was like, they used to advertise that it binds and dislodges the fats. So, I don't know, I bought a bottle of that stuff to use in the scene. Kaito-san, I used to hear those ads every night. Bar Kaito-san, Art Bell advertised them, and binds and dislodges. So that's where that came from.
Well, that's great. Some of those commercials on Coast to Coast are absolutely hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember there was that one. God, yeah, there are some funny ones. There was, for years, it was Tanya Roberts was advertising some sort of Las Vegas thing. Hi, George. Like she acted like, they're on a phone call. Tanya, what's going on in Las?
Tell me about the Star Wars mockumentary. Tell me what it's about.
Well, I mean, it's a pseudo behind the scenes. Another one of these. I'm fascinated by behind the scenes footage and featurettes, making of featurettes, any kind of that always fascinated me, especially those vintage featurettes from the 70s, 60s, and 70s, which were like little movies in themselves. They were very creative, and sometimes other filmmakers would be invited and put them together and have creative freedom to do what they want with it. Sometimes these little companies would put them together, like Jay Anson, who wrote the Amityville Horror, his company, he wrote and directed a lot of those vintage featurettes in the 70s. And they were very creative. I mean, the one, watch the one for John Borman's Point Blank, or Funny Girl, Barbara Streisand, or dozens of other movies. But the Star Wars mockumentary was inspired by. I mean, I'm getting a little off topic here, just on the subject of featurettes and behind the scenes footage, but it's all related. Since it's a field that the Star Wars mockumentary was inspired by all those little mini featurettes that were included on the first Star Wars prequel DVDs that came out. The first two in particular, because the third film hadn't come out at the time I started cutting the. This is 2003. So yeah, just watching all these little featurettes on the making of the prequels, going back to the late 90s when Lucas first. It just all that footage was fascinating, and I thought it would be funny to shoot wraparound footage of disgruntled employees and things going wrong, and that sort of thing. And a friend of mine had a loft in downtown, so we had a good location for that. I had friends who were sort of eager to do something, so that all kind of came together. It just sort of happened. The circumstances were there, and I do remember, though, coming up with that idea just after watching hours of those little behind-the-scenes bits, which are so much more interesting than those movies, but on the DVDs. And there were tons of them on the first two DVDs, that the special edition, the dual, the deluxe edition of Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. There was a lot of documentation, behind-the-scenes documentation.
Yeah, it was kind of overwhelming. I remember, when those were first released.
Yeah, and it was, and that those little featurettes were far more interesting than the movies. But you also kind of got an insight on on things going on. I mean, how the Lucasfilm people were kind of seeing through the fact that films aren't very, at least first time around, it's not working very well. And
it's like, well, we need to find money for more CGI.
Right. Yeah, he's complaining about budget and not having, which is astounding to think. I mean, how you've got a guaranteed, you can't have like a more safe, guaranteed money-making franchise than that. Out of all the franchises that the studios spend hundreds of millions, a lot more than they did on the Star Wars prequels, you can't have a safer bet, and yet he's complaining. And I think it had something to do with the fact that he was financing it himself or something, because he wanted to have. But it just seems like, I mean, anyone would finance it and give him complete freedom one way or the other at that time, because it was just a guaranteed win situation. So I don't see what wouldn't seem like money would be a problem at all, regardless of what kind of control he wanted to have. You'd think.
Right.
You can't have a more successful, safer situation than that. That's for sure.
Let's talk about your feelings about Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, because they seem to come up quite often in more than just one video, one film, one short. I'm just curious. I'm just curious how you feel about them.
Well, I mean, they, like so many other artists of that generation, the 60s. Coming in, and creatively coming out of that time, they were part of that wave of creative energy that came out of the late '60s. The Francis Coppola troupe, John Milius, all these guys, Lucas, Spielberg, you name it, hundreds of them. And they all had great things. They went on to do great things through the 70s, when they got successful. And most of them kind of reached a point where, the work was going downhill. They were getting very commercial. It happened to everyone. So, everyone, Coppola, you name it. Name an artist that came out of the late 60s did great work through the 70s. Amazing, fantastic, successful, pioneering, groundbreaking. Continued to do great work through the 80s. By the late 80s, you were seeing, that sort of success and commercialism and was starting to affect the work, and it was going downhill really fast. But name an artist that continued to be consistent, through the late 80s and 90s and 2000s that came out of that era. They all kind of, suffered the same demise, really. So my feelings of them are they're great. They're very smart. I mean, extremely articulate, intelligent. They did great work, especially Spielberg early on. Lucas made 3 great movies as a director: THX American and Star Wars. They're all very good. How can I expand on that? I mean, what?
Yeah. I sense a little more cynicism in it than maybe what you're letting on. But perhaps I'm projecting.
Well, you mean the way the movies make fun of them, or the way they're satirical? That I wasn't really. No, it's more of a satirical. I think of it as just a satirical homage than it is being derogatory. I mean, I don't know. Well, I mean, in Lucas in particular, I mean, the Star Wars mockumentary is pretty harsh. But I mean, they deserved it. I mean, look, come on. These people are so delusional and far gone, and surround all these yes men surrounding the king, and that's just how bad that got. It's not, but the thing is, it happened to everyone. It would have happened to me if I came out of the late '60s and was successful and was doing great work in the '70s. I would have gone down that same path. I would have been delusional, and if I was successful. I mean, that's just what success does. Money and success. You surround yourself with yes men, and you're living in a vacuum. And I think that vacuum that he was in kind of caught up eventually, because he became very cynical. Lucas was he almost like borderline distraught and depressed, because then I've heard him talk a lot about how he quit because everyone hated him, and he put all this work into everything, and then people just hate you in the end, and no, so I'm done.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's his own fault. I mean, he should have stuck to his promise of doing small independent films, and all of his complaints about not getting anyone to finance them. I mean, he's right. But it's hard to believe that he couldn't finance some of those himself through his giant empire that he has, especially after he sold Star Wars. I mean, how could you not? But I don't, who knows? I mean, inspiration kind of run out anyways. I mean, really, was there anything left to do at a certain point, after a certain point? So, is there anything really left to say? And yeah, that's just that. That's how I feel about them. I mean, I like them. As I say, they're both fascinating to listen to, because they're so they articulate things so well, and they're both really intelligent, far more than I will ever be. So I admire that aspect as well.
Fatal Pulse or Night Pulse, or what is it? The Untitled Yuppie Fear Thriller.
Mm-hmm.
Did it also at one point have, before you release it, is John Carpenter something or another? Am I thinking of another short?
Yeah, that's another one. No, I did that in 2014 before Fatal Pulse, after Foxfur. Did you watch Foxfur, by the way?
Yeah, I actually, I was going to bring that up shortly here. I went to the premiere of Foxfur when it premiered in Pittsburgh here.
Oh, which theater was that?
It was at Pittsburgh Filmmakers, the Millwood screening room.
Yeah. John Carpenter's Corpse,
Yeah,
That
that's
was
what it
just
was
a little short that I did for. Have you seen that yet? It hasn't really been released. It's Severin Films is supposed to be putting that out. It's already 5 years delayed, but he keeps saying he's going to put it out as part of this compilation of shorts.
I feel like I saw a portion of it, but I think but I think it was also 5 years ago, and then I've never seen that name associated with any link since then. And I think in my head, is it pretty like neon or like heavily lit the way that Fatal Pulse is?
Yeah,
I think that's
it
where I
is
mixed
actually.
that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyhow, yeah, Fatal Pulse. What can I tell you about that one?
Mike Hickey. Did you how did you get him in there in the role of Trent?
Do you know him?
I mean, I'm a fan of his work.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, he's a good friend of mine. I've known Mike for years.
Oh, cool.
I mean, the movie was cast with friends.
Yeah.
It was just whoever was around. It wasn't. I wasn't. The movie, it was one of those things that the circumstances were there, and we just. I didn't go out of my way to. To seek out to cast people. I did a little bit of that. Towards the end, but when it grew into something more, when I kept adding things onto it, then it became more difficult to which is why it took so long. The first, I don't know, 6 months or so of shooting that, it was just, it was just moving at its own. I mean, it was like making itself. It was the people were there, the equipment was there, people were eager to do, to work on it. A few films that I've made were kind of like that, where it's usually the other way around, where it's a lot of difficulty pulling people together, getting whatever it is you need, if you're looking for, if you need to borrow equipment or if you need someone to help out or work for no money, or usually that's you're going through a lot of trouble, but not in that case. I mean, when you have a good location. We had access to, as it started off, we had access to this really nice house up in the Hollywood Hills. It's a perfect location. It was right across the street it was right next to, where Sandra Bullock and Cameron Diaz, and right across the street from Jimmy Kimmel's place. And it was the right location for this early 90s kind of yuppie, neo-noir yuppie fear thriller that I've been thinking about doing for a while. So it all started off with improv. We just started making up things. We had the location, we had a few actors, more people were showing up with lights, more equipment started. It just grew. It just grew and grew. And then I was, I kept trying to sort of turn it into something epic in the end, and create this world, this almost alternate Blade Runner universe of the early 90s, of dark colors and moving lights and lots of neon and just over stylized,
and that's
rain and water.
That's another movie where you're pretty heavy on the. I mean, one of the major aspects of the movie is like commercials and late night movies, and
yeah, that's true. It plays a part in that. Although it's all through because one of the main characters is the couch potato deadbeat brother-in-law who's watching. And that was a big part of the inspiration for this thing. All those infomercials that was a big part of that era. Like the ABC promos and the commercials and that sort of the tone and the mood of the 70s and the 80s. They identify each period. The late 80s, early 90s had their own sort of tone to them with these infomercials of like these sex commercials. And they're all kind of neo-noir, dreamy saxophone and. I call 9, and I just remember that it is so ingrained in my mind from that era. Sitting up all, I mean, I don't know if you were watching a lot of network TV at that time, like I was, staying up all night, those things were on constantly, hours and hours of those things. Call 900, you couldn't get away from them. Unless you had cable or something, but, so yeah, that was a big part of the inspiration were those 1-900, infomercials and all the other kind of, pop culture references and TV commercials and things of that.
Right, yeah,
period.
You threw Rhonda Shear in there, and I was going to say
USA Up All Night.
Yeah, she and USA Up All Night have a long-lasting influence on my appreciation for sleazy
exactly.
movies.
Yeah, I mean, and the movie's all set at night. I wanted it to have that kind of up all night fever dream quality to it, but in this sort of stylized early 90s neon, neo-noir, world where all the billboards are these, are like these movies from that era. And I wanted all the billboards to be like these obscure direct-to-video films like Night Eyes 2 or, whatever, just these things that nobody's heard of, but actually exist. The Unborn
and Sade and Rush scene.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I don't know how to describe that scene. But like,
yeah, I mean, I'm glad we were able to, we had, we had access to a good location, and I'm glad I was able to get that in the movie, because I did want Sade to always be a part of that, be a character in it, and I wanted a scene where Sade was performing somewhere, but had no idea how we could film that without access to a nightclub or a stage or something,
Mm-hmm. And then Rush.
So the
plays
Rush
their,
and
like,
all that was added on, yeah. It just it grew and expanded. The circumstances, they were very lucky circumstances to have access to. That's how the movie kind of, that's where the impetus of the film was just the circumstances of how I was able to get all those first few scenes done. The house scenes, the location, all the stuff at the house with at the mansion with the infomercials and the Tobo character and the wife and the husband trapped in the room and trying to get rid of this guy, and then the stuff with Sade performing, and all that was connected. And all those, they were all the very first scenes I shot. So then I had something, I had enough they were I didn't have a feature at that time. I just had a few scene shots. So then I went out and tried to expand more, and we didn't have as much access to the house after that. So I had to set the rest of it on the streets or easily accessible locations. So then it became chase scenes, and it needed action. So, so then, added on the chase stuff, and I kept trying to work in some kind of sensible plot, but God, it was just, when you have no money, it's just impossible. Really difficult.
I think it's close.
Yeah, I mean, you can't rely. If you don't have really good actors, when your story is relying on good performances and actors who can learn their lines to begin with. I mean, that's kind of a rarity in itself. But you have to work around all that. You have to make up for all that. If you can't tell a dialogue-driven story. And there's nothing worse. A lot of low-budget films really suffer from bad acting and bad music. Bad acting and bad music are, often the two ingredients you get from ultra low-budget or no-budget movies. It does cost money. I mean, if you want really interesting, really good, not just good actors, but interesting actors, very talented people, they're not easy to find. They're in demand. If there are people that are interested, if they're pursuing an acting career, they probably have already been discovered to some degree, so they're going to cost money. Music, it's it's not like I don't know. I mean, there might be some really good composers out there who work for very little money, but I've never really met anyone who's been able to give me music that I was satisfied with on a small budget. And the good music is hard enough. Even if you have an unlimited budget, it's difficult enough to get.
Right.
I mean, even if Jerry Goldsmith was still alive, and I actually, had the money to hire him, and he did it, that still wouldn't be a guarantee I'd get, a great score. I mean, he has, occasionally done some mediocre scores. So, or in this case, Christopher Young. Christopher Young was the composer I really wanted to score. I used all of his music in the movie. Let's say I actually, and I know Christopher. I interviewed him. He's a really cool guy, very nice, approachable. But say I had a little bit of a budget and I hired him, and it still wouldn't guarantee I'd get the score that I really wanted. He might do a kind of a rushed electronics-based score, and not that kind of haunting melodic orchestral score that I wanted. So, yeah, the point is that good music is very as darn near impossible, especially when you have no money.
Yeah. All right, so Foxfur.
Yeah.
This is the one. I think this one stands out to me as kind of the most cohesive and least cynical.
Huh.
And I think it's interesting how you're like, since Space Disco 1, you I think the tie-in for all of the films that we've talked about so far, minus the Star Wars mockumentary, I don't really think that, but Fatal Pulse, Reflections of Evil, Space Disco 1, you have this sort of sense of they exist.
There is a pop culture kind of inspired cynicism to all of them in a way, I guess, right? I mean, each of them deal with a specific time period with lots of references, TV commercials, and things like that, and they're all kind of fatalistic. They're all some form or another, the end of the world themes to them.
Yeah, and sort of the almost like time loop, where it's like we're sort of trapped here and we're just sort of running in circles like madmen.
Yeah, that's a theme that I'm fascinated by as well. I mean, because that definitely was and Reflections was a big inspiration. I wanted this character to be stuck in a time loop where he can't get out of this purgatory. He has to keep he's selling these watches, but he keeps making enough to go back and
right, it just
restock. Can't get out. Then I wanted that to be a big part of it. He makes just enough to restock and go back another batch of watches, and then he's back. And
the way you deliver that line is so sincere. Every time I break even.
Yeah, and there's a lot of repetition in the movie. Reflections, every scene goes on. The a little too long. Everything, and the big flaw of that movie when I look at it, I think the ideas are funny, but everything goes on a little too long. Although the anger and the rage and all the hostility of the barking dog, that I did want to go on. I didn't care. I wanted that to go on forever. But yeah, everything else, is kind of a sketch-based. Probably it goes on a little long. That's always a problem. Every filmmaker has everything.
Yes.
You get a sense, and you definitely every film I've made, you're always sort of progressing a little. Hopefully, I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, but I feel like I've gotten a better sense of what's really necessary and what isn't, as far as what scenes and what the movie needs, and pacing and all that. But of course, pacing in general has intensified as the years have passed. It's like everything,
yes, very much so.
Movies, the further you go back, the slower everything goes, and the more time movies took to tell the story. And you could show things, a character walking for like 5 minutes as they get out of a car or the front of a door, things like, you don't do any of that stuff anymore. You got to keep things moving,
Mm-hmm.
fast. Keep characters busy doing things all the time. When you have dialogue, the characters have to be doing 20 things at once while they're delivering their dialogue at rapid pace. You just have to keep the audience distracted and glued to the screen at all times. That's all it's all about now. So you have these empty movies that, I mean, like the last Star Wars film is an example. That movie, there was nothing. There was not one interesting idea in that whole stupid thing. But it was all just directed with that stupid J.J. Abrams, like, keep the pace, rapid fire, characters whisking through one scene to the next. So, the audience is sort of entertained and with their mind shut off. That's all the...
Fox fur.
So what were we talking about? Fox fur? Yeah.
Yeah. So fox fur.
The least cynical, you were saying.
Yeah. And I heard you go, I think there's like a sense of hope in that movie that I feel when I watch it. And
someone else told me that, actually. This friend of mine who just kind of rates all my films and the general feeling or reaction he gets. He said something. Foxford was happy. I liked that one. Everything else is dark. But I like Foxford. I remember the inspiration for that one was really strong, and most of it was inspired by the Billy Meyer UFO case, which is a famous case in the 70s. It was a Swiss farmer with contacts, and it really created all of this UFO lore with this extraterrestrial race from the Pleiades. You hear that referenced a lot in the UFO field, the Pleiadians, this, and people, various people claiming to have contact with Pleiadians. It really started with the Billy Meyer case, which is fascinating because there's a lot of blatant sort of falseness to that whole case. I mean, when you look at the photographs and the 8mm footage that he shot, which there's, you can study and you can analyze. It's all, it's on YouTube, and it's so blatantly fake. I mean, anyone who knows models and miniatures and how they move, and suspended on wires, and the gravity and the you can see that he somehow did this, and I mean, so it's an odd case. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole thing was invented. Maybe there's, who's to say? But definitely the photographic evidence was. So yeah, I don't know. Something fascinating about the whole thing, and I can't quite articulate what I was trying to say in the movie, but it absolutely wasn't taking a cynical, skeptical kind of, just make fun. It wasn't a derogatory sort of making fun of the whole situation type of type of thing.
I don't see it as that either.
It's there's a lot of intriguing aspects to it, and
Although I do like that joke between Fox Fur and I think she's in the bookstore, or it's right after she leaves the bookstore and she sees the black dots in the sky.
yeah,
And she's like, did you see those black dots? And is it Bob Lazar's character outside with her at that point?
Yeah.
And he was like,
yeah.
wait, you can't see those. She's like, yeah, I've seen them my whole life. You're not supposed to.
Yeah,
see
that never.
those.
There's a lot more of that in the. There was a longer script written, and it starts off sort of establishing Foxfur and how she sees. I'm trying to remember what it was now. She sees energy. She sees positive and negative energy, and negative energy is like an oil. It's like perfect kind of CGI effect, really. But I was going to shoot it with physical oil in a water tank, and so every time something terrible happened, like when she kills her landlady, she goes crazy. There's all this black oil like floating in the air, but the movie was. I didn't set it, and I think in the original script it starts off. It's actually set in the early '80s, and she sees like colorful energy. There was so much creative energy at that time, and very positive. She sees that physically manifested. So I can't. I'm trying to remember I don't remember the exact logical timeline. In the movie, she steps into the year 1982 when she crashes on the bus and enters Malibu Creek Park. This is after like 4 different actresses have played the same character, so it's even more confusing. I don't even know if that comes across very clearly. The fact that now she's in the year 1982 and she's watching them film an episode of MASH, which they did shoot up in they had a MASH camp. Malibu Creek Park used to belong to Paramount. It used to be a big filming spot. Paramount owned it, and it's called Fox Ranch. And Planet of the Apes movies were shot there. A lot of things going way back. There's a list of films going back to the 40s that were. Now it's it's been a state park, so that was what all that was about. The particles that she sees are negative and positive energy, and there was something more to it though, and I'm trying to remember elements of the original script.
Yeah.
What are your favorite parts of Foxfur?
My favorite parts of Foxfur. I really like
scenes that stand out. Yeah, your favorite.
I really like inside. All right, so when they're in the bookstore and there's the couple of guys and they're just like watching the Bob Lazar videos.
Yeah, the cholos.
And they're like, "Fuck yeah, man! Hell yeah, yeah." I mean,
the cholos have taken over the Bodhi tree, and David Icke is working the register. And...
Yeah. I mean, as far as like comedy, I think that gets me the most. The opening scene, I think, is some of the best and strangest acting in the movie. And they're just talking about.
Now, which opening scene? The stuff with Chris and the root. I mean, it starts off with her in the bedroom, and then Chris Caniff is bouncing a big ball, and he's going to go pick her up, and then he picks her up in the van, and
wasn't it the
all that kind of weird stuff?
When they're talking about she's editing something with like two
the
two
scene
guys.
With the 2 black clients.
Yeah. That scene is just. I feel like there's like a level of like ridiculous to it, and it's also sort of like uncomfortable, or it's like what the hell is this, like but it's a really intense and interesting scene.
Yeah, that was a scene that it was the last thing I shot. It was so difficult. I I wasn't sure if I was ever going to get that. It was an idea. I mean, I had written that scene. That was definitely something that was in a script that I wrote, and I wanted to, it was inspired by a real life kind of situation. And I just thought it would be funny to place this character into that. But finding actors who were funny enough and talented enough, that's where you're challenged when you have no money.
Yeah.
And, what can you do? I can't start, auditioning people. It's just not, I mean, you have no money. You don't even have a place to audition people. You have to figure all that out. And and I didn't really have time to do that or the money to. But I just got lucky. I mean, one of the guys was not a very good actor. The other guy was very good. Where I placed an ad somewhere. I don't know if they got paid anything at all. But I just basically took the two guys that showed up that day. I wasn't sure if anyone was going to show, and I didn't know who was going to show. But these two guys came through. Out of a bunch of people that I contacted, because they all dropped out, and I was sort of mostly expecting nobody to show up on this, but these two guys did show up. One of them was really funny. The other guy was not very good. But nonetheless, we got it done. It worked. Amazing. By some miracle, it worked. So, and it was also a miracle that somebody showed up with I forgot to bring my, we were filming it. I think I didn't have my a mic for the audio for the. I needed like a boom Rode mic to pick up their audio. So somebody rushed over with one. Fortunately.
Yeah. Jeez.
Anyhow, so that was.
So, I think I'm gonna start wrapping this up here. Are you watching anything interesting right now?
No.
No.
I watching as in like at this moment, or
no, not
going
at this
to a screening,
moment, or watch anything recently that you really enjoyed, or I don't know. It's kind of a
last
throwaway
night I went
question,
to see. I go to there's a theater here. Where are you? You're in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
They probably have like. There must be like an alternative sort of revival house or something where they show. There's a place here in L.A. The New Beverly Tarantino runs. And they show a lot of '70s films there. I'm there quite a bit of time. It's been a little too crowded lately because suddenly everyone's discovered it since his movie came out. And it's not very comfortable when it's crowded. But so it's kind of annoying. But I was there last night. I saw. Hot Rock and Cops and Robbers, a couple of films from the 70s, Robert Redford. And I was there a couple of days before seeing,
All right, folks, that wraps up episode 10. A real big one, a real fun one. Glad we got this one in the books. All right, I'll be back soon. Take care and enjoy the quarantine.